The CEO jokingly invited his waitress's daughter to play the violin, but her performance stunned everyone. Sometimes one evening is enough to change an entire life in a small town in upstate New York. Greenville, New York, lived by its own quiet rules on Central Street. 3 coffee shops, 1 bookstore, and a restaurant called the Glass Room stood side by side. The Glass Room was an exquisite place the city's elite chose for special dinners and negotiations. Waiters in white shirts served tables set with perfectly ironed tablecloths and dishes arranged like art. Sarah Bren, 37, had worked there for 6 years. She didn't complain. Stability, even at the edge of exhaustion, was still stability. 12-hour shifts were almost normal. A constant smile on her face. Restraint in the face of any customer whim. It all became routine. But every evening, when Sarah finished her shift, something broke that routine. Emily, her 12-year-old daughter, always waited on a bench across from the restaurant, legs crossed, head bent over an old violin case. She almost never parted with it. The instrument's body was worn. It wasn't just wood and strings. It was a connection with her mother, with a past Sarah rarely spoke about. Once, long ago, the violin had been Sarah's dream. She had studied at a music school in Manhattan. She had performed on stage. She'd believed the stage would be her home. But everything changed. An unexpected pregnancy, no support from her family, a painful breakup with her mentor. In the end, she returned to her hometown, became a mother, and took on the role of both parents. The violin went into a closet and stayed there, untouched. One day, when Emily was 6, she found the dusty case. Without a word, she brought it to her mother. Sarah stared at it for a long time, then sat down next to her daughter. There were no teachers, no sheet music, no pressure. Only memory. Only love. Emily picked up the violin and never really put it down again. By 10, she was playing complex classical pieces by ear. Local teachers said she had a phenomenal ear and natural rhythm. They suggested competitions, auditions, stages. Sarah refused all of it. She didn't want her daughter swallowed by the same promise that had once broken her. Emily lived at her own pace, playing, reading, sometimes helping part-time in a music store, learning to repair instruments. That evening, when everything began, Sarah was running late. One of her regulars, Mr. Langford, had reserved the VIP room for a special dinner. He was an important man. No one doubted that. Richard Langford, founder of an investment fund, a billionaire. He came to Greenville twice a year, in spring to finalize deals, in fall to hunt and close things out, as he liked to say. Tall, gray-haired, always in an expensive suit, he spoke as if the world owed him something. His peculiar sense of humor almost always involved demonstrating power, sometimes subtly, sometimes openly. For the staff, his evenings were a challenge. Sarah was serving wine when Langford glanced toward the entrance. Through the glass, he saw a girl on the bench with a shabby violin case. "Is that your daughter?" he asked casually as she approached the table. Sarah tensed. "Yes, sir." "And that's her violin?" he added, chuckling. "Behind her back?" "Yes," Sarah replied quietly. "She plays." Langford laughed as if he'd heard the punchline to a joke. "In Greenville, of course. And can she play anything other than a dog waltz?" Laughter rolled around the table. Sarah went pale, but stayed silent. "Why don't we have a little fun?" Langford continued. "Let her play right here. A small private concert. I'll even pay for the show." He pulled out his wallet, took a crisp $100 bill, and placed it on the edge of the table so everyone could see. Emily watched him from the doorway now. She wasn't exactly afraid, but she didn't feel safe. There was something strange in her gaze, as if she didn't fully understand why this was happening, but some part of her had already accepted the challenge. "This isn't necessary," Sarah began quietly. "I'll play," Emily said. She stepped forward, opened the case, and took out the violin. The bow fit into her hand like it had been made for her. The clicking of heels on the floor stopped. Conversations faded. People in the room turned their heads toward the girl. "Well then," Langford said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's begin." Emily took a breath and placed the bow on the strings. Sarah's eyes were fixed on her daughter's hands. They weren't trembling. The first note rang out, clear, deep, and nothing like what this room was used to hearing. Within seconds, the restaurant seemed to change. Emily wasn't just playing. She was telling a story. The melody grew, gathered strength, turned into something raw and emotional. The room fell silent. Even the cooks stuck their heads out from the kitchen doors. Forks froze above plates. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her chest tight, not from fear, but from a pride so sharp it almost hurt. She knew this piece. It was a meditation from an opera Sarah had once played herself, a work only a handful of students at her old music school had known. Emily had never seen the music. She was playing it by ear, playing it and making it her own. When the last note faded, there were 2 heartbeats of absolute stillness. Then the hall exploded in applause. No one clapped louder than a man sitting against the far wall in a gray jacket, gray at the temples, with an attentive, calm face. He approached Sarah afterward. "Boston Academy of Music," he said, handing her a business card. "We need to talk about your daughter." Langford wasn't furious yet, but something inside him creaked, like an expensive Swiss watch that needed oil. He looked at the girl with the shabby violin, at the people applauding as if she were at Carnegie Hall, not in a small-town restaurant. To his irritation, he had to admit, this was not a joke. It was real talent. "Well," he said, forcing a smile as Sarah returned to the table, "your daughter is more talented than you let on." Sarah nodded slightly and went back to work as if nothing had happened. Emily quietly sat down on a chair by the wall, carefully placing the violin back in its case. Langford turned to the man in the gray jacket. "You said, Academy of Music?" "Yes," the man replied, introducing himself as Thomas Rain. "A private academy in Boston. We train young musicians with high potential." And today, he smiled faintly, "I saw exactly that." "Oh, Boston," Langford drawled. "And I suppose you're offering a place for, what, a couple $100,000 a year? Or are we suddenly doing charity?" "In special cases," Rain said calmly, "we offer full scholarships. Tuition, housing, food, everything." Emily is exactly such a case. Irritation tightened something in Langford's chest. He didn't like losing control or losing an asset. "Well, you know," he said louder so everyone at the table could hear, "you can hand out scholarships to anyone you like. I have a different approach. I could get the girl a professional instrument, teachers, solo performances, if she shows loyalty. Or," he nodded toward Rain, "she can take your more reasonable offer." Rain looked at him with a mild, slightly puzzled expression. Sarah pressed her lips together. "Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Langford," she said evenly. "But for now, we'll just talk. No decisions yet." Langford said nothing, but his thoughts were already racing. The girl was a rare gem. He didn't like losing something that could become a profitable project. If he invested in her, then when she took off, he would be the one standing next to her, the man who discovered her, not some gray-haired professor from Boston. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the restaurant emptied, Richard approached Sarah again. "Sarah," he said quietly, dropping the host's tone, "I understand you're used to handling everything alone. But you and your daughter aren't exactly in a position to refuse good offers. I'm not your enemy. On the contrary, I'm offering help. Do you really want to sell my choice?" Sarah asked softly. "Or buy my daughter?" He chuckled. "You can only buy what's for sale. Everything else is just a matter of time and circumstances." Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but Emily appeared at her side. "We're not for sale," the girl said simply, "and we're not afraid." Langford looked at her for a long moment. He was a smart man. He understood there was something in this girl that couldn't be boxed, polished, and branded. And that, more than anything, angered him. That same night, in their tiny apartment on the outskirts of town, Sarah sat in the kitchen, looking out the window. A mug of tea cooled on the table next to an open laptop. On the screen was the website of the academy Rain had mentioned. Emily walked into the kitchen. "Do you think it's worth it?" Sarah asked quietly, not turning around. "I don't know," Emily replied. "Do you?" "There's a different world there," Sarah said. "Different rules. More responsibility. I'm not sure I can handle it." "I think you can," Emily said simply. "I'm just afraid you won't be there." "I'll always be there," Sarah answered. "Even if I'm not." Emily nodded. Her mother's words scared her and gave her strength at the same time. The next morning, Sarah agreed to meet Rain. They sat in the empty restaurant, sun filtering through the windows as if the previous night had never happened. "You once studied at a music school," Rain said. "I checked. You had a good reputation." Sarah nodded. That ended quickly. "And yet," he continued, "you've managed to pass on to your daughter knowledge that usually takes decades to gain." He paused. You saved the music, even when you lost the stage. Sarah looked away. I wanted her to have something of her own, she said. I wanted her to know that talent isn't a curse. Rain nodded slowly. I want to offer her a chance. No strings attached. A full scholarship. We'll formalize everything. But I won't lie, it will be hard. Strict discipline. High expectations. Emotional pressure. And it's hardest for those who come from outside our usual circles. She'll handle it, Sarah replied. I'm afraid. But I believe in her. Rain smiled faintly. She's not just talented, he said. She hears real music. That's rare. When he left, Sarah remained by the window. She felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting, terrifying, and, for the first time in years, maybe right. Meanwhile, in his hotel room, Richard Langford called his assistant. Find out everything about this Rain and his academy, he said. Scholarships, terms, contracts, and prepare an alternative. I don't like it when something is taken from me. He looked out over Greenville. Until now, it had been his piece of the world. Now, somewhere within it, there was a girl he couldn't predict. And that made him angry. Friday evening at the glass room felt like a performance. New napkins, updated wine lists, glasses polished to a sparkle. The owner walked through the room, checked every detail, and withdrew into the shadows. Langford was in town again. 2 rooms reserved. One for business, one, as his assistant put it, for entertainment. The administrator asked Sarah to stay for the evening shift. Langford preferred her, the quiet, efficient one. She agreed. It didn't matter who sat in the VIP room tonight. Her thoughts were elsewhere. 3 days had passed since the first performance. Rain had sent Emily a formal invitation, scholarship confirmed, documents attached, list of necessary certificates. He didn't pressure them, but his email made it clear he was waiting for an answer. Sarah printed everything and kept the papers in a drawer in the kitchen as if saying, yes, would somehow make it all too real. Emily didn't ask. She just kept playing, sometimes with headphones on in her room. Sarah heard fragments of Vivaldi, Schubert, Bach, and unfamiliar modern melodies that still somehow felt right. Emily was searching for her own sound. Before leaving for work, Sarah was surprised to see her daughter waiting backstage, violin case in hand. What happened? Sarah asked. Nothing, Emily answered. I just feel I need to be here tonight. Sarah nodded, but inside she tensed. By 8 p.m., the hall was full. Langford was in a brilliant mood. He joked loudly, praised the wine, tipped generously. Where's your little star? He asked Sarah when she approached with a dish. A concert tonight. Sarah didn't answer. Emily stepped out of the shadows, violin in her hands, eyes fixed on him. I can play, she said. If you want. Silence fell. A few guests turned their heads. Well then, Langford laughed. Round 2. Let's see if you're as prepared as last time. The waiter turned off the background music. The air felt like the surface of icy water, perfectly still, moments before a dive. Emily moved to the window. Behind her, evening city lights glowed softly. In that warm yellow light, she looked almost fragile. The violin was the same old one. The bow was worn, but her hands were steady. She began to play. Not classical this time. She chose a contemporary piece she had composed herself, woven from fragments of sonatas and her own themes. It was risky, wrong from an academic point of view, but it was honest. The music came in waves, at first soft and transparent, like light rain, then stronger, deeper, with rising energy. Emily seemed not to notice the audience at all. She wasn't playing for them. She was playing to say, I'm here. I can do this. I don't need permission. When she finished, the hall was silent. No forks clinked. No whispers. Then someone clapped. Hesitantly. Then another. Then louder. Soon the entire room was applauding. Someone stood up. Someone whistled. This was no longer entertainment. It was a confession. Langford clapped as well, but he didn't smile. He watched Emily with cold interest, like an investor studying a volatile stock. A few minutes later, Rain approached Emily, shook her hand, then turned to Sarah. Now there's no choice, he said gently. Emily, you have to go? It's not a request. It's a duty to what you have. Emily looked at her mother. Sarah nodded. Tomorrow we start the paperwork, Rain said. I've already prepared everything. I'll go, Emily answered calmly. When the hall was empty and Sarah was changing, Langford appeared again. Congratulations, he said. This isn't an asset, you know. It's a person. His tone hardened. But people still make choices. Sometimes it's better to accept the right offer than regret it later. He held out a business card. I can give her everything she needs. The academy is fine, but after that there will be a stage, contracts, management. Let her think about it. Sarah didn't take the card. She thought about it, she said. And she chose. Without you. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Emily slept peacefully, hugging a pillow. The violin lay on the floor next to her bed, out of its case, as if she were afraid the sound might disappear if she hit it again. In the kitchen, Sarah poured herself coffee and looked at the academy documents. They lay neatly stacked, waiting. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, housing, food, health insurance. In 2 years, the academy could even enter her into an audition for a Juilliard scholarship. Is that you? Emily asked the next day, looking at an old photo. A young girl with thick brown hair stood by a piano in a Manhattan School of Music uniform. Sarah nodded. My last year before you were born. I was 19. You were beautiful, Emily said. Thank you, Sarah smiled sadly. I thought I'd become a soloist. I studied 8 to 10 hours a day. My teacher said I had good prospects. Everything looked perfect. What happened? Sarah hesitated, then flipped to another photo. An informal one, taken at a party. Next to her stood a tall young man with a bright smile and a violin in his hand. You guessed, Sarah said. Martin, Emily asked. Yes. He was older. In graduate school. We played together. Talked for hours. It felt like a movie. Love, mistakes, late-night conversations. And then, when I told him I was pregnant, he was silent. Then he disappeared. She exhaled. I was alone. My parents were in shock. They refused to help, especially when I said I would keep you. My teacher tried to persuade me to take an academic break, but I already knew I wouldn't be back. Everything fell apart. I came back to Greenville, got a job, and then you were born. Why did you never tell me? Emily asked quietly. Because I was afraid you would think you ruined my life, Sarah whispered. Emily frowned. I know that's not true. At first it was hard, Sarah admitted. I cried at night. Not because of you, because of me, because of what I'd lost. And then you picked up the violin. And I realized the music hadn't gone away. It just moved to you. They sat in silence for a while. Sarah held the photograph. Emily held her mother's hand. I'm not afraid to leave, Emily said suddenly. I'm afraid to leave you alone. Sarah smiled through tears. And I'm afraid not to let you go, she said. But you have to. Not just because you're talented. Because you're ready. I was never as brave as you at your age. You still didn't give up, Emily replied. You raised me. That's stronger than music. No, honey, Sarah said softly. That is music. Just in a different form. 2 days later, Rain returned to town with contracts in a neat folder. This time he came not to the restaurant, but straight to Sarah's house. Everything is ready, he said, smiling at Emily on the doorstep. Your flight is tomorrow morning. We'll have a driver in Albany. We've signed everything, Sarah said, handing him back the papers. Thank you for waiting. I never doubted you'd say yes, Rain replied. Not really. After he left, Sarah walked Emily to her room. The suitcase was already packed. The violin lay on top, wrapped in cloth. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she gave her daughter an envelope. You can read it on the way, she said. Just in case. I'm not very good at saying important things out loud. Emily didn't open it yet. She just hugged her mother. Everything will be okay, she whispered. I know it. Albany Airport was half empty at 6 a.m. Emily sat by the window, looking at the runways, the slow movement of blinking lights in the distance. Next to her was the old violin case and a small suitcase, her whole new life, packed into 2 hands. Rain sat a few seats away, reading a printout. A young woman named Kate typed messages on her phone. No one was rushing Emily. There were still 40 minutes until boarding. She finally opened the letter. If you're reading this, you're probably already on your way. I'm drinking coffee in the kitchen now and trying not to cry. You probably look calm, but I know there's a storm inside you. You're stronger than I was at your age. You're smarter, more honest with yourself. You're not afraid to move forward. I'm proud of that. Remember, music isn't just a stage. It's you. It's your truth. Don't change yourself for someone else's expectations. And if one day you suddenly lose a note, remember, I'm always with you, even if only in your memory. With love, Mom. Emily blinked away tears and for the first time since this all began, smiled. Rain Academy was on the outskirts of Boston, in an old brick building with a tower where the library had once been. High stone steps, high ceilings, classrooms with rows of chairs and soundproof walls. The air there was full of music, not flashy, but deep, concentrated. Her roommate was a girl named Lily, a pianist. Everyone played something. Some played perfectly, technically flawless to the point of coldness. Others were emotional, but chaotic. Her teacher, Professor Vincent, listened silently to Emily's playing the first time. Then he said only, "You lack form, but you have something I can't teach. This isn't about technique. It's about who you are." Emily worked 6, sometimes 7 hours a day, sometimes in tears, sometimes feeling like she couldn't do it. Every time she thought about giving up, she heard Sarah's voice in her mind. "This is your truth." And she kept going. 6 months later, at the Academy's winter concert, Emily performed last. Rain's decision. She walked onto the stage in a simple black dress Lily had helped her choose. The hall was full. Teachers, producers, journalists. In her hands was not the old violin, but a new one the Academy had gifted her on admission. The old one stayed in her room, like a piece of home. She played a piece she had written herself. It began with the theme Sarah had once played for her in their tiny apartment. Then it unfolded into a complex, almost symphonic section. At the very end, it returned to the same motif, only now mature, completed. When the final note dissolved into silence, the hall stood still for one long heartbeat. Then came the ovation. Not just applause, recognition. Rain watched from the wall, a slight smile on his face. She had passed the main test, not academic, but internal. A week later, a short article appeared in a music magazine. A girl from a working-class town had made an entire hall freeze. Her name, Emily Bren. One quote stood out. "My first teacher's name is Sarah. She was a waitress, but she was the one who taught me how to hear music." Sarah read the article sitting in the glass room, now under new ownership. When she saw her name on the page, tears blurred the letters. A young waiter rushed over, worried. "Are you okay?" She smiled, wiping her eyes. "Yes, everything's fine. It's just happiness." Greenville kept living. People discussed local elections. New houses went up. The restaurant changed owners. Langford stopped coming. Officially, he'd been temporarily suspended. No one missed him much. Somewhere in Boston, the girl he had tried to humiliate stepped onto bigger and bigger stages. Her name was becoming more and more recognized, not because she had a PR team, but because her sound was true. Not the sound of the instrument, the sound of who she was. Music isn't about who plays louder. It's about who plays more sincerely. And sometimes one evening in a small restaurant is enough to change everything. If you have the courage not to stay silent. If you have a note, play it. Even if your violin is old. Even if the hall is full of indifferent faces. Sometimes 3 minutes are enough for the world to remember your name.